The laser measure beeped twice. A crisp, electronic sound that cut through the humid quiet of the late May afternoon. From his new composite deck, Preston Gaines watched Claudia Hensley jot a figure onto her clipboard. His pool was barely a week old. The water still a brilliant chemical blue. And his neighbor, the one who served as secretary of the Oakmont Preserve Homeowners Association, was already auditing his property line from the safety of the common area sidewalk. She offered a thin, polite smile when she noticed him watching, a gesture that conveyed nothing of warmth and everything of scrutiny. The threat was immediate, but veiled in the impenetrable armor of procedure. "Everything all right?" Claudia Preston called out, his voice deliberately casual. He held a signed inspection report from the county, the final piece of paper that officially transformed the 5-year dream of a backyard pool into a tangible reality. Claudia capped her pen with a precise click, just ensuring the new construction aligns with the community's architectural standards. Preston, fiduciary duty. She tapped the clipboard. "It's a beautiful addition. Really changes the view." Preston placed his coffee mug down with deliberate care, aligning the handle perfectly with the edge of a coaster. The word view hung in the air, weighted with implication. He walked to the edge of the deck, the newly installed safety railing cool beneath his hand. "We were meticulous. Followed the ARC-approved plans to the inch. The setbacks are all correct." "I'm sure they are," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's just that paragraph 5.1.7 of the covenants is a bit interpretive. The board likes to be proactive." She turned and walked down the sidewalk toward her own house 2 doors down. The very picture of diligent volunteerism. Preston watched her go, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. He retreated into the cool of the kitchen, where his wife, Tanya, was unloading groceries. She caught the look on his face instantly. "Claudia," she asked, pausing with a carton of milk in her hand. "On patrol," he confirmed, sliding the county report onto the granite countertop. She mentioned for 5.1.7. Tanya's shoulders slumped. She walked over to the built-in desk in the corner of the kitchen and pulled a thick, 3-ring binder from the shelf. The spine read, "Oakmont Preserve Governing Documents." She flipped through the tabbed sections: bylaws, articles of incorporation, rules and regulations until she found the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs. Her finger traced down a page until she found the section they had discussed months ago, before the first shovel ever broke ground. She had circled it in pencil. 5.1.7. Easements and view corridors. No structure, fence, landscaping, or other material improvement shall be placed or permitted to remain on any lot which may unreasonably obstruct or diminish the view from, or unreasonably affect the solar access of, any adjacent lot as such view is designated in the community master plan. Unreasonably obstruct. Tanya read aloud, her voice laced with frustration. "It's the vaguest clause in the whole document. We made sure the plans put the equipment on the far side of the house for this exact reason." "I know," Preston said. "But with her, it's never about the rules. It's about the person breaking them." This quiet war had begun 5 years earlier, long before they were neighbors. Preston's logistics and supply chain management firm, a lean, data-driven operation he'd built from the ground up, had submitted a bid for the Wake County Municipal Services contract. The incumbent, Hensley Courier and Sons, a family-owned business that had held the contract for over a decade, was run by Claudia's husband and had been founded by her father. Hensley's bid was based on legacy and relationships. Preston's was based on algorithmic efficiency and was 22% lower. He'd won it fairly. The county's procurement office had been unequivocal. But for Claudia, it was a personal affront. Hensley Courier and Sons, unable to absorb the loss of its largest client, had downsized dramatically within a year and was eventually sold for parts. She saw Preston not as a competitor who had presented a better offer, but as the man who had dismantled her family's legacy. When Preston and Tanya, unaware of the connection, had moved into Oakmont Preserve 2 years later, they'd hoped the shared zip code would be a non-issue. They were professionals, adults, but Claudia's politeness was a brittle veneer over a foundation of deep-seated resentment. She had never forgiven him, and now, with the completion of the pool, she had a new, officially sanctioned avenue for her grudge. "She's going to make this a problem, isn't she?" Tanya said, closing the binder with a soft thud. "She's going to try," Preston answered, his mind already shifting into the methodical, process-driven mode that had made his business successful. "But we have the approved plans, the county permits, and the final inspection. We have a paper trail. Let her try." He wanted to believe it was that simple, but as he looked out the window at the shimmering blue water, he couldn't shake the feeling that the clear, calm surface was deceptive. Below it, unseen things were moving, and Claudia Hensley was just waiting for the right moment to strike. The first strike didn't come as a direct assault, but as a subtle incursion. Preston had installed 2 discreet, motion-activated security cameras during the pool construction, one aimed at the equipment pad, and another covering the back gate that led to the common area path. A week after his sidewalk conversation with Claudia, his phone buzzed with a motion alert while he was in a meeting in Durham. He dismissed it, assuming it was a deer or a neighbor's cat. When he checked the footage that evening, his stomach clenched. The timestamp read 2:14 p.m. The video showed Claudia, dressed in a tasteful one-piece swimsuit and carrying a rolled-up towel, unlatching his back gate and stepping onto his property. She didn't swim. Instead, she walked the perimeter of the pool deck with a purpose, holding a yellow tape measure. She carefully measured the distance from the deck's edge to the property line marker, then from the corner of the pool's coping to the base of the 6-foot privacy fence. She made meticulous notes on a small pad, her expression one of intense concentration. After nearly 10 minutes of this, she packed up her tools, relatched the gate, and left. It was a clear, unambiguous act of trespassing, executed with the cold precision of an auditor. Preston showed the video to Tanya. Her face hardened. "That's it. Call the police." "Preston, that is criminal trespassing. She came onto our private property with a tape measure." Preston held up a hand, his mind racing. "And what will they do? They'll come out, file a report, and tell her not to do it again. She'll claim she was performing her HOA duties. It becomes a he said, she said, and it gives her exactly what she wants: drama. It makes us look like the unreasonable ones escalating a simple misunderstanding. No, we don't give her that. We stick to the process." His logic was sound, but it felt unsatisfying. The violation was deeply personal. This was his home, the sanctuary he had built for his family. Claudia had breached it without a shred of hesitation. 10 days later, the certified letter arrived. Receipt: 7019 WO 140 WO 1 8842 1199. It was a formal violation notice from Accord Management, the third-party company that handled the HOA's administrative tasks. Preston signed for it at the door, a cold dread settling over him as he saw the return address. He opened it in the kitchen, Tanya reading over his shoulder. The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic aggression. It alleged a violation of CC&R Paragraph 5.1.7, the View Corridor Clause. It stated that the new pool and deck structure appears to encroach upon the designated view corridor easement for adjacent lots. Specifically, Lot 14. Lot 14 was Claudia Hensley's property. The letter gave him 14 days to submit a remediation plan, to cure the violation, or to formally request a hearing before the board. Remediation plan. Tanya's voice was sharp with disbelief. What are we supposed to do? Demolish the deck. There is no designated view corridor on our plat map. We checked. She's inventing it, Preston said, his voice dangerously quiet. Or she's twisting that vague language to mean whatever she wants. This is the inciting incident. This is her declaration of war. His first move was logical and direct. He composed a polite, factual email to the community manager at Accord Management, a woman named Diane Fletcher. He attached a PDF of his ARC-approved plans, his final county permit, and a link to the video file of Claudia trespassing on his property with a tape measure. Diane, he wrote, we are in receipt of the violation notice regarding BR 5.1.7. Please see the attached approved plans, which clearly show our compliance with all setbacks. Furthermore, the violation appears to have been filed by the resident of Lot 14, who is also the board secretary. I have also attached video evidence of this individual trespassing on my private property to gather information for this complaint. Given this clear conflict of interest and improper conduct, we request that this violation be summarily dismissed. The response he received 2 days later was a chilling lesson in corporate detachment. Dear Mr. Gaines, the email began. Thank you for your correspondence. Per standard procedure, Accord Management acts solely as the administrative agent for the board of directors. We do not get involved in neighbor-to-neighbor disputes or interpret the governing documents. Your dispute with the violation notice must be addressed directly with the board. You have the right to request a hearing as outlined in the notice. Please let us know if you wish to be placed on the agenda for the next hearing session. Preston stared at the screen. The boilerplate text, the refusal to even acknowledge the video evidence, the impersonal redirection. It was a wall, a perfectly constructed, legally sound wall designed to protect the management company and the board, leaving him completely on his own. He was being railroaded, and the train was running on the very tracks of due process he had intended to use for his own defense. They're not going to help us, he told Tanya, turning the laptop so she could see. They're treating it like a legitimate violation. They're forcing us into a hearing where she will be one of the judges. So what do we do? Tanya asked, her arms wrapped around herself. Preston closed the laptop. His logistics business had taught him that when a system is designed to work against you, you don't fight the system head-on. You research it, you map its weaknesses, and you find a different route. I'm calling Sarah, he said, already reaching for his phone. It's time to stop looking at the HOA binder and start looking at the county records. Sarah Jenkins had been the first paralegal Preston hired when his company grew large enough to need in-house counsel. She was sharp, relentless, and possessed a near-supernatural ability to navigate the labyrinthine archives of public records. When Preston explained the situation, her response was immediate and enthusiastic. A view corridor easement that isn't on the plat map. Oh, this is juicy, she said over the phone. That sounds like a selective enforcement claim waiting to happen. Send me everything you have. I'll meet you at the Wake County Register of Deeds office tomorrow at lunch. The next day, Preston stood with Sarah in the quiet, climate-controlled records room, the air thick with the smell of old paper and microfilm. Sarah moved with a practiced efficiency, her fingers flying across a keyboard at a public terminal, cross-referencing parcel numbers and recording dates. Within an hour, she had a stack of documents printed out. They spread the large, crackling survey map of Oakmont Preserve, Phase 2, across a wide table. Sarah's finger traced the lines of Preston's property, Lot 16. Okay, here's your lot, she said, Standard utility easements along the back and side. Nothing about a view corridor. Here's her lot, Lot 14. She then pointed to a separate document, a deed filed in 2008, shortly after the development was completed. And here's the easement deed, she said. Her brow furrowed. It's real, but it's a mess. It was filed by the developer, granting a scenic view easement over a portion of Lot 15 and Lot 16 for the benefit of Lot 14. The language is incredibly broad, citing the preservation of the existing westward view of sunset over Jordan Lake. It was clearly written to benefit her lot, but it's legally questionable. It doesn't define the vertical or horizontal limits of the view, which makes it almost unenforceable. So she has an easement, but it's uselessly vague, Preston asked. Exactly. It's the kind of thing a lawyer would have a field day with, Sarah confirmed. But to a layperson on an HOA board, it looks official enough to be a weapon. Now for the interesting part. While Sarah had been digging through property records, Preston had been working another angle. He had submitted a formal written request to Accord Management for the official minutes of all board meetings from the past year. It was his right as a homeowner. The response came via the online portal, a single PDF file. As he scrolled through it, he saw entire paragraphs, particularly from the April 12th executive session, blacked out with digital redaction marks. What happened on April 12th that they don't want me to see? He had muttered to himself. He sent the redacted file to Sarah, who saw it as another piece of the puzzle. The next piece arrived not through official channels, but through a discreet email from an unfamiliar address. The sender was Arthur Henderson, a retired engineer who had served on the HOA board for years before abruptly resigning. Preston had only spoken to him a few times at community cookouts. Mr. Gaines, the email read, I was sorry to hear about the violation notice. I am not surprised. Claudia Hensley's tactics are the reason I stepped down from the board. She did the same thing to the Miller family on Lot 15, back in 2015, when they wanted to plant a row of Leyland cypress for privacy. She used that same view easement to bully them into submission. I believe her conflict of interest in these matters is a profound breach of her fiduciary duty. I have attached the unredacted minutes from the board meeting on April 12, 2008, when this easement was first discussed. I trust you will use them ethically. Do not mention my name. Preston's heart hammered in his chest as he opened the attachment. The file was a scanned copy of the original typed minutes. He scrolled down to the redacted section from the official copy he'd received. The blacked-out text was now clear. Motion by C. Hensley to formally request the developer, Oakmont Partners, LLC, to dedicate a scenic view easement over lots 15 and 16 for the benefit of Lot 14 prior to the developer's final transfer of control to the association. Director Hensley notes that the premium paid for Lot 14 was contingent on the preservation of the westward view. Motion, seconded by T. Wallace. Motion passes 3-2 without requirement for an independent survey to define the easement's parameters. Preston leaned back in his chair, a slow, cold anger solidifying into resolve. The pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. This wasn't just a grudge over a lost contract. Claudia had used her early position on the board to secure a valuable, albeit poorly defined, easement from the developer that directly increased her own property value. She was the sole beneficiary. Her complaint against him wasn't about protecting a community standard. It was about protecting her personal investment. The fight wasn't about his pool anymore. It was about her blatant, documented conflict of interest. His phone rang. It was Sarah. Preston. I've cross-referenced the easement deed with the original developer filings, she said, her voice tight with excitement. The easement was granted just 6 weeks before the developer officially handed the HOA over to the residents. And guess who was the homeowner representative on the transition committee? Claudia Hensley. She didn't just benefit from this. She orchestrated it. I know, Preston said grimly. I've got the unredacted minutes to prove it. He felt a surge of confidence. He had the facts, the documents, the timeline. He was ready. But he underestimated Claudia's capacity for escalation. While he had been digging into the past, she had been laying a new trap in the present. 2 days later, a second certified letter arrived. This one cited a violation of FERGR 8.4.2, the General Nuisance Clause. It alleged that loud and disruptive noise, specifically shouting and splashing from children, had been reported emanating from his property after the community's 9:00 p.m. quiet hours. Preston stared at the notice, baffled. His kids, Jordan, 15, and Ava, 11, were meticulous about the pool rules, knowing how much was at stake. They were never outside that late. Then, the social chill began. A neighbor he usually chatted with while walking the dog now gave him a curt nod and hurried past. At the community mailbox, he overheard 2 women whispering about the noise problems at the Gaines house. Claudia was poisoning the well, painting him not as a victim of harassment, but as a disruptive neighbor who refused to follow the rules. The fight was no longer confined to paper. It had spilled out into the community, isolating his family. That evening, Tanya found him on the deck, staring at the dark water. The violation notices and printed emails were spread on the patio table. She's trying to break us, Tanya said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. She wants to make us feel so unwelcome that we give up. She's cornered, Preston replied, tapping the unredacted minutes. She knows I'm digging, so she's throwing everything she can at us to discredit me before the hearing. It's a classic diversion tactic. He stood up, pacing the deck. When I get into that hearing, I'm not just defending against a violation. I'm prosecuting a case for abuse of power. He stopped and looked at his wife, the grim reality of the situation settling upon them. They were no longer just defending their pool. They were fighting for their home, their reputation, and their family's right to peace in a community that was rapidly turning against them. The date for the hearing was set for 2 weeks away. The clock was ticking. The week before the hearing was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Claudia, aware that Preston was building a case, intensified her campaign of procedural harassment. A courtesy notice appeared in their email. This one from Accord Management, on behalf of the Architectural Control Committee, on which Claudia also served, suggesting the color of their patio umbrella. A tasteful navy blue. Might not be from the pre-approved palette, and a formal application for its approval should be submitted. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. The family felt the pressure acutely. Jordan came home from school one afternoon, throwing his backpack onto the floor. A couple of guys on the bus were asking if we're getting kicked out of the neighborhood, he said, his voice a mixture of anger and embarrassment. They said their parents heard we have a bunch of violations. Ava grew quiet, hesitant to even go into the backyard. Is Mrs. Hensley watching us? She asked Preston one evening as he tucked her in. The question twisted a knife in his gut. No, sweetheart, he said, forcing a reassuring smile. And she is never, ever allowed in our yard again. I promise. It was Tanya who kept him centered, as Preston drafted a furious, multi-page rebuttal to the nuisance complaint, filled with righteous anger and accusations. She placed a gentle hand on his. Let's stick to the facts, Preston, she advised, her voice a calm anchor in his storm of frustration. Don't give her the satisfaction of seeing you angry. We win this by being smarter, not louder. Let the documents speak for themselves. He took her advice, deleting the emotional paragraphs and leaving only a cold, chronological presentation of evidence. With Sarah's help, he organized his defense into a crisp, compelling narrative. They prepared a binder for each board member, complete with tabbed sections, the violation, the governing documents, the evidence of trespassing, the evidence of conflict of interest. The day before the hearing, Preston received a call from the HOA president, a mild-mannered retiree named Gerald Lyons. "Preston," he said, his tone weary. "Our counsel has advised that we offer to mediate this dispute before the formal hearing. Would you be willing to meet with Claudia and a neutral third party?" Preston agreed. Knowing it was a procedural hoop he had to jump through. The mediation was held in a sterile conference room at the management company's office. A professional mediator sat at the head of the table, while Preston and Claudia sat on opposite sides. For 30 minutes. The mediator went through the motions, suggesting compromises that were impossible. Perhaps Mr. Gaines could install some strategic landscaping to soften the view of the deck the mediator offered. "The deck is not the issue," Preston stated flatly. "The issue is a board member trespassing on my property, and then filing a retaliatory violation based on an easement from which she is the sole beneficiary." Claudia remained silent for most of the session, her hands folded primly on the table. But near the end, as the mediator acknowledged they were at an impasse, she spoke, her voice quiet and directed only at Preston. "That logistics contract, it wasn't just business," she said, her gaze fixed on a point on the wall just past his shoulder. "That contract put my father's company out of business. It was his life's work. You talk about your home. That business was my home, my family's history. You destroyed it with spreadsheets and algorithms." For the first time, Preston saw past the petty tyrant to the wounded daughter. He saw the genuine pain that fueled her vendetta. It didn't excuse her actions, the trespassing, the harassment, the fear she'd inflicted on his children, but it explained them. She wasn't a cartoon villain. She was a tragic figure, trapped in a narrative of loss and unable to see him as anything other than the agent of her family's decline. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family's business, Claudia," Preston said, his voice even. "It was a public bid, and we presented the most competitive offer. That's how business works. It wasn't personal. What you're doing to my family now, this is—" The mediation failed, as he knew it would, but it had served a purpose. It had stripped away the last pretense of procedural objectivity. This was, and always had been, personal. The night of the hearing arrived. The special hearing of the board was held in the community clubhouse. The room was arranged not for a casual meeting, but for a quasi-judicial proceeding. A long table for the 5 board members sat at the front. A podium for speakers stood opposite, in the audience. Nearly 30 homeowners sat in neatly arranged rows of folding chairs, a jury of his peers, drawn by the drama that had been simmering for weeks. On a large projector screen behind the board, the meeting agenda was displayed. Preston saw his name, Agenda Item 4, Hearing for Violation Notice, VN 2023-047 Gaines, Lot 16. Time allotment, 5 minutes. Next to the agenda, a digital countdown clock was preset to 05:00. The sight of it sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. 5 minutes. That's all he had to dismantle a carefully constructed fiction and expose the truth. Tanya squeezed his hand. "You've got this," she whispered. Mr. Henderson, the former board member, sat in the back row, giving Preston a subtle, encouraging nod. Sarah had sent a final text. Just the facts. Chronological. Devastating. The board now calls to order the hearing for the violation filed against Lot 16, Gerald Lyons announced, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Mr. Gaines, you have 5 minutes to present your case. Your time starts now. The clock on the screen began to tick down in silent. Red numerals 04:59, 04:58. Preston walked to the podium, placing his binder on the lectern. He took a deep breath, looked directly at the board members, and began. Good evening. My name is Preston Gaines, owner of Lot 16. I am here to address 2 violation notices, but more importantly, to address a fundamental abuse of this board's authority. 04:45. He clicked a remote, and the projector displayed a high-resolution image of the first violation notice. The board claims I have violated CC&R 5.1.7 by obstructing a view corridor. Let's look at the language of that covenant. He clicked again, and the vague, interpretive text of the clause filled the screen. 04:10 now. Let's look at the official county plat map for my property. The image changed to the survey map Sarah had pulled. As you can see, there are utility easements clearly marked. There is no mention of a view corridor, because one with defined parameters does not legally exist on this map. 03:30. He paused, letting the visual evidence sink in. So where did this claim come from? It came from the board secretary, Mrs. Hensley, the owner of Lot 14, the sole beneficiary of this supposed easement. He clicked again, showing a still frame from his security camera, Claudia, on his property, with her tape measure. A murmur went through the audience. 02:50. More importantly, Preston continued, his voice steady and building in force. Let's examine the origin of this vague easement. It was added to the CC&Rs in 2008 at the specific request of the homeowner of Lot 14. How do we know this? He took his final, decisive step. Because of these. Click. The screen now showed the unredacted minutes from the April 12, 2008 board meeting. He used a laser pointer to highlight the key sentence. Motion, by C. Hensley to formally request the developer to dedicate a scenic view easement for the benefit of Lot 14. 2. Wairo. The room was utterly silent. The board members leaned forward, reading the text on the screen. Claudia's face was a pale, rigid mask. This is not a rule violation, Preston declared, his voice ringing with conviction. It is a documented, long-standing conflict of interest. A board member has been using her position to enforce a covenant she herself created for her own financial and aesthetic benefit. The violation notice against my property is not a legitimate enforcement action. It is retaliation, and it is a perversion of the power this community has entrusted to its board. 1:25. He clicked to the second violation, the nuisance complaint. This notice, for noise from my children, was received 2 days after I informed Mrs. Hensley I had video evidence of her trespassing. It is baseless and designed only to harass and discredit my family. He had made his case. The clock showed just over a minute remaining. He could have stopped there. He could have used the remaining time to further detail Claudia's campaign, to list every petty notice, every cold shoulder from neighbors. But he caught Mr. Henderson's eye from the back of the room. He saw Tanya's steady gaze. He thought of his children. He decided, in that moment, to build a bridge, not just burn one down. 0:55. Finally, Preston said, changing his tone from prosecutorial to communal. This has been a difficult process for my family and, I'm sure, for the community. And while the violations against me are baseless, true community requires consideration from all of us. He looked at the family from Lot 12, his direct neighbors. I have noticed that my new deck lighting, though code compliant, is brighter than I intended. I've already spoken with the Patels, and I want to state for the record that I will be installing shields on the fixtures this weekend to prevent any light spill onto their property. We can enforce the rules and still be good neighbors." The clock ticked down. 0:10, 00:09. He had finished. He nodded to the board. "Thank you for your time." He walked back to his seat as the clock struck 0. The silence in the room was profound. Then, Gerald Lyons cleared his throat. He looked not at Preston, but down the table at Claudia Hensley. His expression was no longer mild. It was one of deep disappointment and resolve. The hearing was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. The board did not adjourn for a private session. Gerald Lyons, his face set like stone, addressed the room. "In light of the evidence presented, which is frankly irrefutable, the board is prepared to vote on several motions." The air crackled with tension. Claudia sat motionless, her hands flat on the table in front of her. Her public mask of composure finally shattered. "First," Gerald announced, his voice firm, "I move to summarily dismiss with prejudice both violation notice VN 2023-047 and GO VN 2023-051 against Lot 16. All in favor." 4 hands shot up instantly. One board member, a known ally of Claudia's, abstained. The motion passed. A wave of relief washed over Preston. "Second," Gerald continued, his gaze still fixed on Claudia, "I move to formally censure Board Secretary Claudia Hensley for a severe breach of fiduciary duty and a clear conflict of interest in her actions regarding Lot 16. This censure will be recorded in the permanent minutes of the association." The vote was the same, 4 in favor, 1 abstention. Third, I move that the board commission an independent land survey and legal review of the easement cited in FER 5.1.7 at the association's expense, to clarify its legal standing and define its parameters for all future applications. Passed. "And finally," Gerald said, his voice dropping slightly, "I move that the board place our contract with Accord Management on a 90-day probationary review, citing their failure to properly investigate a homeowner's initial complaint of board member misconduct and trespassing." Passed. It was a total vindication. A clean sweep. As Gerald declared the motions carried, a smattering of applause broke out in the audience. Claudia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. Without a word, without looking at anyone, she gathered her papers and walked out of the clubhouse, her exit punctuated by the quiet closing of the door. In the aftermath, a line of neighbors formed to speak with Preston, Mr. Ridley, the man who had questioned him about the fence, shook his hand firmly. "I apologize. Preston, she told a very different story. Thank you for setting the record straight." The Patels, from Lot 12, thanked him for his consideration regarding the lights, one by one. The people who had been distant and cold, armed with Claudia's narrative, came forward to offer their support, their expressions a mixture of apology and respect. The community, fractured by misinformation, began to mend itself right there in the clubhouse. Back at home, after the kids were in bed, Preston and Tanya sat on the deck, the soft glow of the controversial lights illuminating the space. The pool was still and quiet. "You did it," Tanya said, her voice filled with a weary pride. "You took on the whole system." "We did it," Preston corrected, taking her hand. "I couldn't have done it without you keeping me focused, or Sarah digging up the dirt, or Mr. Henderson taking a risk." It was a victory not won by shouting, but by meticulous research and an unwavering belief in the facts. He had taken Claudia's greatest weapon, the dense, intimidating rulebook of the HOA, and turned it against her. Months passed. The autumn leaves began to turn, and a new sense of normalcy settled over Oakmont Preserve. Accord management was replaced by a more transparent and responsive company. The board, with a new secretary, began posting unredacted minutes to the homeowner portal. The controversial easement was legally defined by the survey as a narrow corridor that Preston's pool did not, in fact, impede in any way. In a surprising turn, Preston was asked to volunteer for the Architectural Control Committee, the very body Claudia had used to harass him. He accepted, believing he could bring a sense of fairness and reason to the process. One rainy Saturday afternoon, he was in his home office, reviewing old files on the community server to familiarize himself with past rulings. He clicked on the folder for Lot 14, Claudia's property. He pulled up her original building permit from 2007. Then, he pulled up the satellite view and the official plat map. His eyes narrowed. He cross-referenced the dimensions, his finger tracing the lines on the screen. There it was, clear as day. The stone patio extending from her back door, the one where she often sat reading, was built 5 feet over the rear setback line, a direct violation of the same CC&Rs she had wielded against so many others. It was an unpermitted structure. He had her. The proof was right there in the county records. He could draft a courtesy notice. He could start the violation process, the slow, bureaucratic grind that he now knew so intimately. He could subject her to the same stress, the same anxiety, the same public scrutiny she had inflicted upon his family. Justice, served cold and procedural. He leaned back in his chair, the power a heavy weight in his hands. He thought of the look on her face during the mediation, the quiet pain in her voice when she spoke of her father's company. That evening, he showed his findings to Tanya. She looked at the screen, then at him. "So," she said softly, "what are you going to do?" He looked out the window toward Claudia's house. He could see the lights on inside. A part of him, the part that remembered his daughter's fear and his own white-knuckled anger, wanted to send the notice. But then, he thought about the kind of community he wanted to live in. He thought about his speech at the hearing, about being good neighbors. Retaliation wouldn't fix what she had done. It would only perpetuate the cycle, making him a mirror image of her. "I'm not going to do anything to her," he said finally. "Not directly." Instead, at the next ACC meeting, he made a proposal. He drafted a new, clear policy for the entire community, an amnesty program. It outlined a simple, fair, and low-cost process for any homeowner to retroactively seek approval for previously unpermitted improvements, allowing them to bring their properties into compliance without fear of punitive fines. It treated everyone equally under the rules, offering a solution instead of just a punishment. He was no longer just defending his own home. He was helping to build a better, more decent community for everyone. As he sat at the dinner table with his family later that week, the laughter easy and the tension gone, he looked at the faces of his wife and children and knew, with absolute certainty, that he had made the right choice. He had not only won the battle, he had chosen to win the war by refusing to become the enemy.